From the BBR studios, it is Line Locked, where we talk about racing of all kinds with a big emphasis on drag racing. How are you doing?
Pretty good. You?
I'm doing good. I am your host, Chris, and my co-host,
Corey.
Hey, look at it. And the music ended right at the right time.
It's like we're almost at the 28th or 29th episode of this.
You would think we would have had it all together by now.
Yeah,
but
what do you think?
That actually was probably the first time anything actually worked the way it was supposed to work.
Yeah, and it will not end that same way. I promise you that.
So how's your week been, man?
Not too bad. We've been doing pretty good. Just getting some stuff done on what you see behind us, actually.
Oh, my gosh. So in Bowling Green, we went down there, and we've been having problems with the Nova going straight down the track. Actually, on takeoff, on launch, it would want to go left or right, whatever. We did a few things. Did a redneck alignment in the trailer and everything.
Multiple times.
And long story short, during the last qualifier, I started to drive to the pits, and it drove itself to the right. It was so bad and so off. So there was something going on in the front suspension. It was the stock Nova front suspension. Still had, the front shocks,
rear
steer and all that. So we took a vendor from the circle track over there. They had one sitting there, a whole front subframe with the Mustang 2 style on it. And we drove home with that bad boy, and we've been working on it ever since. And we've put a good week and a half.
Yeah, I think I figured out close to 40 hours so far.
Yeah, but we got it all back together, just going to button up the grill and the headlights and all that stuff, and we'll get our fire back up, and we will be ready for Norwalk.
Yep, Norwalk. That's one thing we need to mention. It's going to be July 26th to 28th. This comes out the week of we are leaving to go up there.
Yep.
So if you're in the area of Norwalk, Ohio, we'll be up there for, I forget what they call that race. Do you remember? Blue Suede Cruise. That's
Blue Suede Cruise. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. So it's a great time. Good ice cream and good track.
Yep. And that whole group up there is awesome.
Yeah,
and that is a beautiful track, and I enjoy going up there every time we go.
And
there.
if you enjoy the podcast and you're in the area, we do live podcasts at the track. And if you've been watching, the past few of them have been live from the track. And there's been a really good time.
Yeah. The Mike Bellina one is probably one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Him and his 56 wheel standard, that green 56. If you've seen that guy, he's a legend with those guys. 100%. That's awesome.
We do have a really special guest, though, today.
Yeah, back when I was growing up, I would watch like the Gator Nationals and all those things. This was like in the 70s and 80s, and there was some great announcers that you just recognized their voice the minute they started talking, like Dave McClellan, Bob Frey, and Steve Evans. I mean, those guys were the voice of NHRA. Mm-hmm. And now we are honored and have this great respect for one of the newer guys. I think he's been around. He'll tell us. I think he's been around since like 2013 doing this for us. The one and only Brian.
Are we going to do the
let's go ahead. Just go ahead. The guest. There we go. Man, the lead announcer for NHRA and Fox Sports. Yeah. It is none other than the soon-to-be legend, almost a legend, Brian Lohnes. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys very much for having me, and I think that was way too much of an introduction. Take it. I grew up listening to those guys too. I love them.
Yeah, it's amazing. Your voice is because I'm not necessarily new to the sport, but new to as being interested as I am now. And you've been around that entire portion of me being super interested in it. So having your voice in the background is when we were working on stuff. We have TVs in the shop here, so we always have the NHRA live feed going, and we always hear you and the Lone Zone, stuff like that. I really let's talk a little bit about who you are. I know most people already know, but some people may not. So let's talk a little bit about you, and then we'll get into where you're at right now.
Yeah, so I'm lead broadcaster for the NHRA on Fox. I've been with the NHRA since like the 2014 season, started out as an event announcer and then ended up in the job I have now. I started announcing drag races when I was in my late teens, early 20s at New England Dragway and Lebanon Valley Dragway in New York. And then I started traveling about that time, too. I started traveling, did a little stuff with Super Chevy, and then got on with the IHRA. So I was an IHRA national event guy for about 10 years. I worked with Brian Olson. I worked with Bob Unkerfer and some other guys through the Bill Bader era of IHRA. Then to the end of that, when it went into the hands of like Feld Motorsports, stuff like that. And I left there like around 2011. But along the way, I've always done, different styles of stuff. Like it hasn't just been like the normal traditional thing. I've done a lot of radio races and
Yes.
bracket races and grudge races and,
Yeah.
and on other races and all that stuff. So I've loved, really every aspect of the sport for a very long time.
Yeah, we've heard your voice at Drag and Drive events because we will stream those as well. I mean, you're in a lot of buckets of announcing.
Yeah.
You're doing a lot of stuff. So the NHRA, you became kind of full time with them. I think we read around 2013, something like that. Is that close?
Yeah. So my very first event, to announce with NHRA was my tryout event, which ended up happening to be at my home track, which was kind of like knowing the answers to the test before. So, long story short, I was doing. Steve Gibbs had hired me at the time. He was running all the nostalgia stuff for NHRA. So. He hired me to come down to do the Bowling Green race. I did it in 2012 and then 2013. And during the 2013 race, Bob Fry was there. And I was working with Ron Leake, who is a legend. The guy ran Byron Dragway for many years and just a really fantastic man, a great announcer, huge, just booming voice, like a massive voice. And he and I were having a ball. And Bob Fry was there to do the Cackle Fest on Saturday night. McClellan had done it for many years. And then Bob took over for Dave when Dave kind of stepped away from doing a lot of traveling and stuff. And I never met Bob, and he kind of like waved. You guys have been in the Bowling Green Tower. They get that piece of glass between race control and the announcing booth, and he kind of waved, and I waved back, and he went off to do his thing. And he came back in the room like 2 hours later, and he looked around. He says, "I know you," and he looked at me. He said, "Who the hell are you?" And the next week was the very first NHRA national event at New England Dragway. And so he actually called the California office and said, "Hey, you got to listen to this guy." And so, so they stuck me on there for like Super Gas, and I finished Super Gas. They said, do Super Stock. So then I did Super Stock, and I did some stuff that weekend. And what was funny is I did it. I thought it went pretty well because, again, you're at your home racetrack. So I knew everybody's race car. I knew their dog's name. I knew their kids. So, but then I didn't hear anything. And I thought, wow, okay, I guess that's it.
Failure.
I guess I got to do it once and it's over. And at SEMA that year, I was at SEMA with Bang Shift. And at SEMA, Evan Jonat, the guy that I ended up working for, was like, "Hey, I need to talk to you." I was like, "Well, you could have called me 5 months ago." And it all kind of went from there. So my very first event on the announcing staff for NHRA was the 2014 Gator Nationals. And even that was kind of funny because I wasn't even supposed to be at that race. I was only supposed to do like 6 or 7 events that year. And they had a young guy who was actually really good, but he was a flake. And he had tried to scam the company into paying for an airline ticket for his girlfriend to come to the race. And they found out.
Okay.
And so they fired him like on the spot, and they're like, "Hey, can you come to the Gators this weekend?" And I went down there, and it went well. And I picked up, all of his events plus the stuff I was supposed to do. And by 2015, I was doing the whole tour. So yeah,
we talk about a lot of times, and you've mentioned it. I'm sure Alan Reinhardt's mentioned it about how difficult it is to become like a funny car driver or a top fuel driver. It's a very very small select amount of people, unless you had the funding to do it yourself. But let's talk about how more rare it is to be an announcer for the NHRA. Because, I mean, there's only 3 of you, the main guys, and then you have an interviewer down at the end of the track. So what is it, about 4?
Yeah.
4 announcers.
Usually like back in the day, and if they've gone back to a 3-man crew, so it's like, Reinhardt's kind of the anchor guy in the booth, and then you have like Jason Galvin and Joe Costello who work, they'll alternate like we used to do where, Q1, you'd be at the starting line, the other guys at the finish line, and then you kind of flip-flop over the weekend. Yeah. And then on Sundays, you kind of pick your spot and you stay there because it's so busy you can't really have time to be flopping back and forth. But
so maybe four personalities, compared to the 16 drivers that make the field.
Right.
You're rare.
When you put it that way, you're right. And now they've Jason Logan is awesome as the trackside entertainment guy. Hannah Rickards is stepping up, like she does the stuff in the pits now, and she's a great announcer. She worked at Vegas for many years, doing the dirt track stuff and everything. She's worked for the World of Outlaws, so she's getting more involved in the announcing side as well as doing a lot of the personality interviews and stuff like that. So it is. It's a rare thing, and what's really funny is the story of Brian Olson. I don't know if you guys remember Brian, but he was like this big guy, big voice and big personality. And he and I, we're pals doing our HRA stuff, and we typically room together. And we were in Norwalk one year at the World Nationals, and it was probably 2:00 in the morning, and we found some place that was open to get some food because it had been all night going. And we're sitting there, and this guy walks up and he sees us in our shirts, and he's like, "Oh man, you guys had the best job in the world. And he's right. Olson kind of looked up from his quarter pounder. He says, hey, man, it's 2 a.m. and I'm in the same McDonald's you are. And I always thought that was a great line.
All the fame and none of the money.
But yeah, I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful. And honestly, if New England Dragway hadn't switched sanctions to the NHRA, I'm not sure I ever would have gotten the shot because, unless you can get in front of them and convince them that you need to be, listened to, it's a tough thing. It's like the music industry when you send out your demo tapes, right? Unless the right person hears it, it's sometimes you can be playing a bar for the rest of your life. Yeah.
Well, and you haven't stayed in the same thing. I don't know if you created or if they came to you, but the Lone Zone and that whole what you're doing there, that's new. That's a new thing that NHRA is either trying or or whatever, but people seem to like it,
Oh yeah. That's Jason Logan, and people do this all the time. So he is Logan. So it is the Low Zone.
Low Zone. Sorry about
it. It's all good. That's his, but all that actually started, like the very beginning of that. It's actually a pretty good story where 1 year at Brainerd, we've been like brainstorming ideas. It's like, hey, let's have the drivers have walk-up music like they do at a baseball game when the guy's coming up. And so it was a total debacle the first time we did it. And then the second time we did it was at Indy, and that was a total nightmare as well. But people seemed to get into it, and the drivers were picking their own music. So it's like Doug Paletta rolled up, the most mild-mannered guy in the world, and he had Enter Sandman. And it's like, wait a second. Like, this guy doesn't drink, smoke, or swear. And all of a sudden he's got my playing. It's like, so the music became this kind of cool window into the drivers' personalities. And really, they've taken all these baby steps to where they are now, where it's like, I think it's cool because for the longest time, like when there was downtime, it was just kind of like, oh, let's play some ads, let's do this. Now it's like there's somebody out there playing games with people, playing music, and Jason's one of the single funniest human beings I've ever met.
It's always a good time.
He was doing a game one time. They used to do this thing called the Mellow Yellow Shuffle, where these Mellow Yellow cans would be on the stage, like the little the pea under the walnut shell, right? Yeah. And so you had to pick which can that the ball had fallen into as they're spinning around 100 miles an hour. So he's got this chubby little kid on the fence. The kid's probably 12 years old, and he says, "Oh, what's your name?" "My name's Billy." "All right, Billy, let's play the game." And Billy picks can number 2, and it ends up being can number 3. And Jason looks at him and goes, "Loser." The whole place went nuts. They still gave the kid the
Most of the time they do something for him anyway. That's just it's a really interesting thing for the NHRA to try to develop more of, to make it. There is a lot of downtime between Top Fuel, so they need to fill it with something. And I think that they're definitely going in the right direction as far as making it more, I don't want to say like a WWE type of thing, but having excitement when there can be excitement.
Yeah, and look, part of that is like, for so long, drag racing has always just been geared toward like guys like the three of us that would sit in the stands and watch stuff go down the racetrack all day long and be fine with it. Yeah. And that's all great for us, but like there's so many people that want to come in and just have a day, and they don't really know what they should expect. And so like they're used to going to football games and basketball games and baseball games where there's a dude playing music, whether you see him or not, that's part of it. And guys' wives and girlfriends, when they start hearing some decent tunes and they're sitting out in the sun, drinking a beer or a high noon or something, this is the type of thing that keeps them engaged for longer than they would have been if it was just sitting there staring into the abyss, So I think it's you got to keep evolving the show.
Yeah, I got you. No, for sure. It's a very interesting thing they're doing, and I can appreciate them trying new things out and, allowing some of the new guys coming in to develop some of their own personalities and their own things to make it interesting. Actually, that kind of pulls into one of our things we wanted to talk about, and it's, contentious, I should say, is, the difference between the sportsman racer and the Top Fuel guys. We had that whole controversy with, Tony Stewart and everything about 6 months ago, roughly. And actually, your name got brought up on our podcast about that because you sided with NHRA, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. That is your company, and you had valid points about it. But, is there anything that the NHRA could do that would make the sportsman guys feel like they're part of it? Because right now, a lot of those guys just feel like they're just there to fill time or space, and they don't feel, I don't know. What is your take on that?
My take on it, in a very honest way, my take is I don't. The biggest problem, whether it's NHRA or any drag racing organization has, is that every person that rolls through the gate, rightly or wrongly, thinks they're the show, right? Yeah. So The guy with the F-stock automatic Oldsmobile that rolls in, he thinks he's the show. The guy with the top fuel car rolls in, he thinks he's the show. And these are both racers of equal importance to me. I love all this stuff, right? So I don't place either one ahead of the other in those terms. But at some point, the problem becomes when everybody thinks they're the show, then pretty much at some point or the other, everybody's going to get offended when they're told they're not the show.
Right.
So, like, it sucks beyond sucking when we have weather or something and we are halfway through a round of stock and it's like, you guys go back to the pits. Like, we got to get the fuel cars back up.
Yeah.
I understand why that is a frustration. I understand why it pisses people off. I understand why it makes the NHRA look like the bad guy or whoever's making the decision. But in the end, I don't necessarily have an answer to that question. I don't have.
This is a great lead up, though.
Look, if I say this, if I say, hey, you know what? Yes, we're instead of running top fuel at 11 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, we're going to run super stock, or we're going to run top sportsman first.
Yeah.
The problem is it is a business.
Yeah, 100%.
And the business is funded by the people that walk through that gate and buy tickets.
Yep.
And so the reality of the situation is the cold hard reality of it is they love watching the top sportsman cards. They love watching everything else, but they're buying the tickets to see
top fuel,
the gorillas and the man-eating objects that are going down that racetrack. They're not necessarily buying the tickets to see the sportsman stuff. Some people are. It's a small percentage, and I applaud them for their support of all the different facets of racing. But the bottom line of the equation is that's what's putting the people in the seats.
So that brings me to a kind of a controversial, maybe unanswerable question.
Sure.
Along the same lines.
We're going to just call this segment Brian Does Not Answer Questions.
Listen, I'm not doing the fifth. I will do the best I can.
No, and this is, you said it very well. This is a business, and you have to go along those lines of, you can't stay racing unless you have the money to back it.
Yeah.
Who is more important, the fans or the racers?
Well, this is the chicken and the egg.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe unanswerable.
You don't have a fan without the cars. You don't have the cars without the fans. Yeah. But here's what I can tell you. The PDRA is a prime example and a way to answer this question. PDRA is a spectacular racing organization. Look at what it's done, look at what it's evolved into, and look at what it is. Inarguably, the best eighth-mile door slammer drag racing on the planet. Bar none, end of story. But they do not put a lot of people in the grandstands. Mm-hmm. Okay? So that organization is able to do what they do because they draw a lot of cars, like massive fields of cars. Like when they run their finals at VMP in the fall, they'll have 80 plus in top sportsman and top dragster. They'll have, all these, the Pro Nitrous category obviously kind of fluctuates, but the Pro Boost category is just overflowing with people all the time. So that works because they have a very strong back gate. They have a lot of racers coming in, paying their entry fee to come and compete at a very high level. But it has not yet translated for them into a large spectator style of audience. Mm-hmm. So in that instance, the racers are the most important thing there because without them, they're sunk. Mm-hmm. And they have done a very good job building their program to be incredibly racer friendly. They have built that elite, their elite top sportsman, their elite top dragster to separate out the just guys that are running 350s. They're running pro mods and top sportsman, right? It's epic.
Yeah.
And that still allows a guy that has a car that can run 4.0s or 410 to compete because everybody else has a place to go do that as well.
Yeah. But that's kind of the argument with the sportsman guys is, let's just say the U.S. Nationals, for instance. Sure. I know there's more than 16 that are there to qualify. Let's just say on a good time, there'll be 30 top fuel cars, right?
Sure.
There's probably around 400 of the other categories that aren't there's a lot of money there too.
800.
Okay, so I was a little bit off, just by half.
1,000. It's 1,000.
Yeah.
It's 1,000 car race, and you have probably close to, let's call it 200 if we count the pro mods and everybody else in that pro level.
Yeah.
You get 200 of them, you get 800 everybody else.
So the guy and me, we were sitting up in stands at the U.S. Nationals. We displayed my race truck there a couple years ago, so we got to stay for the event and actually be back in the pits with everybody. Didn't race at it, but we got to sit up in the stands, and I was just looking around, thinking about how much money was on the property. If you just think about toter homes, trailers, cars, and everything else, I think we just rough estimated about $750 million.
I mean, it's way not inaccurate. I think you're right.
Yeah.
I would go with that number.
So again, the PDR is successful because they have a large back gate. Like I like how you put that, and I just couldn't say it right. And also arguably for the U.S. Nationals and most of the major national events, they're maybe not 1,000 cars, but they're at least 500 cars. Most of these other ones. So there's a strong back gate there too. But I don't know if there's a balance that can be struck, but eventually the sportsman guys are just going to have enough of it, and they're going to go to another division or somebody where they feel like they're being appreciated. And that was going to bring us to our next one of our topics we wanted to talk to you about is, do you feel like some of these other larger organizations are maybe hurting car counts or hurting the NHRA themselves? Like, for instance, PDRA, IHRA, there's other ones that are coming, they're smaller now that are coming up. We're all competing for the same space. Is that difficult?
You know what? I don't think I have a different perspective on this. So my perspective on this is the only way the sport exists is if drag strips stay open.
Yes.
Okay. So if drag strips close, then all this is for naught, right? So it doesn't necessarily line up with everybody in our company's vision of life, but it's mine in that I need a healthy PDRA, because that PDRA, when they are making their tour around the country, around their circuit, they're either signing rental agreements, they're working out whatever revenue share with those tracks are making money, right? When NDRL, when any organization is going around to do something, it's great. And the idea that it hurts the NHRA, some people may think that, because I think some people may feel like we should just have our hands around everything, and that's not the way it should be. And when I work for the IHRA, and that's the perspective that's different about me with a lot of the other guys that I work with on the announcing side and stuff like that, is that we were the little brother and we loved it. When Bill Bader ran the IHRA, he would put a column in every one of the drag review magazines, and he always signed it with IHRA and damn proud of it. And it was this idea that we should be proud of who we are. We should take pride in what we do. Like just because we're not as big as NHRA doesn't make us lesser than anything else. And so the idea that people are going to leave and do other things, they're still going to race their cars, and the backward logic here, right? To cure most of the problems that we're talking about right now, what the backward logic is? Less classes. Mm-hmm. So here's the difference. If we take half the sportsman classes and alternate them, run them at half the races, that's going to give everybody else, more time per se at those national events. But it is also going to royally piss off the other half of the people that wanted to enter that event. Mm-hmm. So it's the great argument, and the reason Indy's basically 7 days long is because when you start with 1,000 cars and you're going to qualify, like stock and super stock at Indy, we qualify 128 cars. They'll be close to 150 or 160 trying to get in the field, but round one of stock and super stock and super comp and all these classes are 128 car fields. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of these things. I don't necessarily think it hurts NHRA at all. I think, IHRA, they're trying. Larry Jeffers has the organization. The guy's a smart man, and he's trying to make something of it. To me, I'm not saying what he's doing is sad. What I'm saying is where it was when I worked there to what it is now is not even comparable, unprantually.
Well,
right?
Bill Bader was just such a showman, the whole family. You can just see that from their track they run. Granted, old man has passed now, but his son's taking the reins, and
right, he passed it to Billy and everything. Yeah. So it's like the NDRL exists because there's a lot of guys that want to run that series and run their cars that way, and they don't give a shit about what we do, and that's totally fine. Mm-hmm. That's totally fine. When No Prep Kings was really at its height, like people would come up to me and say, "What's NHRA going to do about No Prep Kings?" I said, "If they do anything, they're effing idiots."
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
When they go around, when No Prep Kings goes to Boise, Idaho, a track I go to Boise every year to do their Night Fire Nationals in August. When they go there and blow that place out and put 7,500 people in it, like that's money that those guys never had before, mm-hmm. and now they have it.
Yeah.
When they're going to Mission, British Columbia in a couple weeks, they're going to blow the doors off that place. They're running up in Spokane. They're going to blow the doors off the place. Like, none of this is bad.
Yeah, prior to them doing No Prep Kings, and they were just doing the street racing stuff. Granted, it's an illegal thing, and they were, NHRA was trying to thwart the problem, and they revoked a bunch of licenses of those guys. And
one of the worst decisions anybody in a company ever made.
Yeah.
And I know the guy who did it is long gone, and thankfully, and hard to find. But it was horrendously short-sighted.
Yeah.
It was just. I remember when I heard about them getting ready to do it, and I was only a couple years in as a national event announcer. I was like, and I had no authority to say anything to anybody. I was just pleading with people. I'm like, you don't understand.
You're just happy to be there.
Yeah, well, no, I was more than that. I was watching what was about to happen.
Yeah.
Like these at the time, the guys that they had making some of those decisions were just they didn't see anything, and going out and about and doing all the different stuff I did at that time. I would tell him, I said, you don't understand what you're about to do. Like, you're about to turn tens of thousands of people against you for making an idiotic decision. And lo and behold, what happened?
Yeah. I mean, I could understand the rationale. Again, the reason the NHRA is around is because they were trying to get people from stop street racing. So I understand the rationale, but it was kind of a black eye. That they made fun of it a lot. I don't know if you ever listened to the Chief and Sean show back in the day. They made fun of it. The NHRA is watching, Jesse. They made fun of it. And now to turn around and now to turn it around and now they're running at these tracks and then bringing ass in seats. I mean, and that's what we need, because arguably the NHRA is only going to go to one track. Maybe one or two of them they go twice a year, but they're only going to go there once. So the rest of the year they've got to fill something in order to make that track stay there. And there's some tracks are awesome, like Bowling Green. NHRA Top Fuel will never be there. So they have to figure out ways. And at the end of the day, that show has put a lot of eyes on racing. A lot of young kids decided they wanted to do it themselves and are now entering it. So it's one of those things where you gotta take the good with the bad and move on. And I think it was the right thing to do.
At the time when they were doing that, like, the one thing I said to those guys and one of my pleading arguments was like, listen, if the idea here is that you're going to punish these guys, like, understand, like, the name of the show is Street Outlaws. So you're not going to punish anybody. You're going to make them even more gigantic than they already are. And if your idea is to try to tamp it down, you should just friggin' ignore this, basically, and just go about your life and business. But clearly they didn't get it. And not that they needed any help, but I guarantee when that happened, it certainly helped to catapult that show even higher than it was already going, because now it verified what these guys were. Now it wasn't.
They are outlaws.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of those guys, as you well know, especially back then, a lot of them had like sportsman racing background. Like a lot of them. And so it's like, not only are you kicking this guy in the nuts, like, he's been a member, he's been part of NHRA, now you're going to kick him in the nuts and throw him out. But two, you're going to turn this guy into Jesse James, baby. He's going to, and it worked for them. It was just a bad decision. Yeah,
for sure. So, there's a lot that goes on in the sport, and thankfully I'm on the same page as you. I think these smaller organizations, they are arguably the sportsmen of the Top Fuel. You have to have them, because without them, you're going to run a program which you have to wait to see anybody race every 45 minutes to an hour. You know what I mean? So you got to have some of those people, and that everybody's got to fill their role. So it's important. You got to. I guess I'm just trying to say that sometimes you got to heed your expectations about what you are or what you're doing, and kind of, we're not all the show guy.
That's what you're saying. Yeah,
it's exactly what you're saying, and I agree with it. And I gave you a little shit when we talked about this several episodes ago. But
are you talking about the Magneto thing with Stewart, or what was
no? When that came out and he was going to be the driver instead of Leah.
Yeah, and everybody was throwing a fit about it.
Yeah, everybody was throwing a fit about, because they thought it was going to be, they were going to announce a new track, or they were going to do something with the sportsman class to make them feel special. Something.
Oh, listen, when that announcement, when that Facebook post came out, or whatever it was, that was like the biggest announcement in the history of NHRA. I wanted to puke on my shoes. Yeah. I mean, it was. I knew as soon as I saw that, I started texting some people in the company. I'm like, you got to be effing kidding me. Like, do you understand what this is? What you you got to be at least somewhat realistic about this. And it was, again, in my opinion, it was a big announcement, but like when it was phrased in that way, I knew exactly what was coming after that.
Yeah, you're gonna take it the wrong way, because essentially what you're saying. Well, a lot of people took it as, oh, so that's the biggest, and that means nothing to me. It didn't.
Right.
It doesn't affect me. My program.
Right.
That was a team announcement. It wasn't an NHRA announcement, and it was. Right. I'm not a sportsman racer. Obviously, we've talked about. I race with NDRL, so totally different scheme of people. But we do test and do run some sportsman stuff at our local tracks. So we hear it from them, and we hear it obviously when we on the internet and see it. But it's tough. All right, so
You want to take a break real quick?
yeah, actually, do you mind if we take just like a little?
Go for it.
All right.
All right. Well, we will be right back with Brian Lohnes here in just a couple minutes. Do you need an engine built right for your car? Take it from us. Call Performance Automotive in Beth Alto, Illinois. Whether it's a small block, big block, Chevy, Ford, or even a diesel. Call Mike or Gordon. These guys are guys that you can trust. That's Performance Automotive, and tell them Line Lock sent ya.
And we're back. Chris had to adjust his seating arrangement, and he said it was not
My
comfortable.
butts was hurting.
So let's talk a little bit about the things that you do outside of the NHRA that are, I assume it's your own projects. The NHRA Insider might be in conjunction with.
Yes,
but,
it is. Yep.
That is really interesting to me. You talk about a lot of the history. Well, for one, you talk about, what's going on, and you have guests and whatnot. But sometimes you talk about the history of the sport, which you mention archives a lot. Is there really an archives, like somewhere?
Well, yeah.
Is there?
Yeah, so the NHRA has this incredibly massive film archive. We have obviously every national dragster archive and all that stuff. So the film archive, it's honestly grown by the month because it's all being digitized. And as much stuff as we have digitized now, there is still probably 100,000 hours of stuff that is not yet digitized. And that goes back from the ESPN days. So we can say from 2010, let's call it 2010, 2011, all the way down to 1955, we still have like at least 100,000 hours worth of stuff to continue to digitize. So we have I'm not selling anything here, but there's these free channels you can throw on your TV, like on Tubi or Plex or Samsung app, Roku, all that stuff. They have channels. There's an NHRA channel on all of those. Mm-hmm. And so you can throw that thing on and it's just streaming. So you throw it on and you might be watching the 67 Summer National or 67 Spring Nationals. And then after that might be the 92 race from Phoenix. And then after that might be the whatever. So those channels are a place where you can jump right in there and look at stuff. But I mean, a lot of the content I create on a weekly basis for NHRA, whether it's the different top fives we do for every race, whether it's the show opens and stuff like that, I work on and write and script that stuff. I'm also in that archive pulling footage. And we actually have some documentary projects coming up that I'm involved in that are heavily involved in that archive. So yes, it is a real thing. And it is like a place that you can go in and just get lost in digitally. And thankfully, it's getting bigger every month.
We, me and my girlfriend bought a big old TV. It was a Samsung TV, and I was going to mention it anyways, but you already beat me to it. It came with that NHRA TV channel on there. And when Corey talked to you at Bowling Green about possibly doing the podcast, I was like, Mary, you got to see this guy. He's going to be possibly on our podcast. And so we turned it on, and you were doing one of your the past segments,
the time machines,
time machine things. And but I have that station on a lot. The girls at the house don't like it, but but
I heard that a lot. Yeah.
But I really love watching the old stuff from the '60s, where I think it was '63 or '64 with the first Christmas tree they had up. Before that was the flagger and stuff. Yeah. Man, watching those guys, no glue on the track, just burning it all the way down. That's awesome.
Of all the stuff Don Garlitz ever accomplished in his life, one of the funniest stats that he's involved in is Don Garlitz is the first guy to ever lose a final round on a red light. 1963 U.S. Nationals, he red lit against Bobby Vodnik, and that is the very first guy who ever lost a final on a red light start.
Oh, I would hate to have that stat, actually. Everybody's got to be a first, but Jesus.
Yeah. Thankfully, he did enough other stuff that one's buried pretty far down the list.
So these archives, are they digitally in a way where they actually have the names of the driver listed somewhere where you can pull them up, or are you just watching footage and literally trying to figure it out? Because it's
set up in a couple ways. We do have a driver section of a gazillion different drivers, everybody you'd expect to be in there, and a bunch of guys that, like Don Camposano, won one race in his life, won the '86 Gator Nationals. We have a little Don Camposano folder in there with his runs and his win. It's also broken up incrementally by year, so I can go search by year. And the top 5 that I did for the Seattle race is coming up next weekend. When I was a kid, I remember watching the highlights or watching the Seattle race in '92. Michael Brotherton rolled Darrell Gwynn's car over in qualifying, and they fixed it overnight, and he ended up winning the race in Top Fuel. And it's a really great story. So I was able to go back to the Seattle '92 race and clip the runs out and send it off to our editors, and they're putting that together. So it's be able to do stuff like that's pretty great.
That's organization. That's something we don't have.
No, we do not. You look at judging by the table, the picnic table and the cloth. Our production value is not that high.
Hey, listen, that mixing board's serious business.
Yeah, it looks like it, doesn't it? We actually we have everything we've done on our YouTube channel, racing wise, all the footage we've ever done. We put on a backup drive. We're never going to use it, but it's the same purpose. Maybe this takes off and we get to your level of fame, and maybe it'd be cool to be able to go back and look at some of that stuff. So
if you don't save it, you'll never have it.
Yeah,
and eventually you'll want it. Yeah. You'll want to see. I mean, it's like I still have VHS tapes when I was racing with my dad when I was 16, and I'm going to have to get them digitized to see the stuff, but you want to have that stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
So another thing that you do, which I really enjoy, is the Dork-o-Motive podcast / video thing that you do. And where do you come up with the topics? Because a lot of them are just really out, left field.
Sure.
And then what is your creative process in trying to research some of these really obscure things? I just don't know how you get the information.
Yeah, so I mean, some of them are racing related. Some of them are just not. I did a history of the Ferris wheel, which is something that seemed like it would put you to sleep, but it actually turned out to be a good story. But I read a lot, and I love reading books. I always have since I was a kid, and I read a lot of just books that have nothing to do with racing. And there's a book called Devil in the White City about the World's Fair in Chicago. And that's where the first Ferris wheel was constructed. So I'm like, damn, this thing's about 360 feet tall. It carries 2,000 people at a time. It's all made out of iron. Like, it's insane. And so then I start picking away at it. And George Washington Gale Ferris led this bizarre life, and he ends up, kind of ruining his whole life over the Ferris wheel. And that became an obsession. And that show took a while. It's a long show, and that one probably took me a month or so to compile. But I'm trying to this afternoon going to read a script that I put together, a racing one that, and again, some of these, a lot of the really long form ones I just do as audio, but the YouTube stuff to me is pretty fun because you can put a visual to it. Mm-hmm. So like to start the 1967 Top Fuel season, Connie Coletta won the AHRA Winter Nationals, the NHRA Winter Nationals, and then he went to Florida and won the NASCAR Winter Nationals as well as the NASCAR, what they call the Eastern Winter Championships. That was in a year where there were basically 10 major drag races in the country. He won 4 of them in a row in Top Fuel to start the season. And it was winning the first 2 races that got him the money to buy his first airplane. And that is what started Coletta Air.
So he's one of the only people that's actually made money off of racing.
Yeah, and that's the coolest part about Connie's story to me. And I don't blame him for it, but everybody gets it backwards. Everybody thinks he owned airplanes and then decided to go racing.
I assumed that. I did not realize that was the story.
Connie Coletta won the AHRA and then NHRA Winter Nationals, and he took the money he won, and he bought an airplane from Ted Hallebrand Wheels. He bought Ted's airplane and started flying parts and shuttling stuff around for Ford. And that's where it all began.
Well, every time my wife says this is a big money pit, I'm going to just bring up that story. So look, it happened to one guy, okay?
Yeah, the guy's a billionaire now.
All I need to do is buy an airplane, Deb.
Yeah, you got to spend money to make money.
But yeah, to long story short, to your question, in the drag racing stuff, it's just the things that fascinate me. Like I did one on Doug Thorley's Bronco Buster, which was, they claim to be the lightest funny car ever built, aluminum chassis. Back in the era when, for better or worse, there were really no rules against doing anything. It's always fascinating to me, the stuff that people tried. And some of it actually worked, and some of it failed horribly.
Yeah, you always see the dual engines and different type of cars, and it always amazes me that there wasn't even more injuries than there really were. Because some of that stuff was like basically not PVC pipe, but just pipe you'd buy from Home Depot to put together a race car.
Absolutely. New England Dragway, the very first guardrails there were iron pipe. It was threaded iron pipe, and it's like you hit that thing, and one, it's not going to do anything to slow you down, and two, it's probably just going to puncture like a porcupine's quills. It's not going to help.
Yeah. Well, that actually brings up our next little talk. We wanted to talk a little bit about the safety of the sport. We really were thinking about the recent John Force accident. There was they talked that there were some issues with the parachute not deploying correctly, and they're working on a fix of that. That is one thing that the NHRA should be very proud of. They're very proactive in making sure that all these vehicles are safe. A lot of people do not like the fact we got to replace seatbelts every 2 years, but there is some reason that they come up with that. I say that's kind of a money grab if you ask me, but there are some that are legitimately somebody has been injured or killed, and this is the reason that the rule has been in place. Good, for instance, is the 1,000-foot mark. They've changed things and progressed it in a way to try to make sure that although it's still dangerous, that's part of the draw to it, that it's a mitigated risk. What kind of your thoughts on? Do you feel like they're being too intrusive on some things like the safety belts type of situation, or do you think you have to take the good with the bad on that as well?
Yeah, look, I think there are some things that you have to look at and kind of scratch your head about in 2024. I don't know the science behind seatbelt degradation or the science behind how that works. So I'm not going to claim that, but there are some things where it's like, do we need to do every 2 years? Who knows?
Yeah.
At that level, I think there are some questions to be asked on some of that stuff. At the professional level, I mean, you look at, Angie Smith last year has this horrendous motorcycle crash in St. Louis, basically breaks both her feet, has some very nasty injuries, which she's like a physical dynamo. So she recovered way quicker than I think anybody expected. But from that accident, they made the riders upgrade their leathers. They made the riders upgrade the gear they wear as far as their, gloves, boots, that type of thing. And, I have a buddy named Jason Pridmore who's a really great motorcycle road racer. He won a bunch of AMA championships, and he's one of he's the analyst. He's the Tony Pedregon of the Moto America series that airs on FS1. And he loves drag racing. And he was so horrified at the gear that our motorcycle racers wear, like road racing motorcycle racers, like they have these crazy suits where it has like a little like inertia switch in it, so if it feels the person tipping over it, it's an airbag, these airbag plate and stuff. And he wasn't necessarily saying go to that level, but he was very happy that an advancement was made with the thicker leathers and the better protective gear that our riders had to wear. So the downside is we always get reminded of this stuff when something horrible happens, and part of it is because you can run simulations, you can run tests, you can run, brash stuff on a jig at a lab, but then you see it in the real world, you go, okay, this is a deficiency that we need to fix. Remember a few years ago, a couple of funny car drivers, Alexis DeJoria and Courtney Forrest, both got hurt on kind of side impact style crashes, and so that was the addition of some different bracing and some regulations as far as seats and stuff like that go. The John Force thing, it was in the moment. I think all of us maybe shared this sentiment. In the moment, as it's happening, you think, I'm not sure this guy's getting out of this car, and it was just so brutal. I mean, it was, other than fatal crashes I've seen, it was the single worst impact I've probably ever seen. When that thing came across the track, it was just horrifying. There's a committee, the Nitro committee, that is made up of drivers and teams they're working with the tech department. So to your point about being intrusive, I think in this instance, this is a very collaborative thing. Nobody is saying you have to do it this way, that the NHRA is not pointing to somebody and say, this is the way you do it, or our way or the highway. There are crew chiefs, there are racers and team owners that are collaboratively at the table coming up with the way to manipulate this situation so it doesn't happen again.
And Alan Reinhart was on, I guess it was WFO podcast, and was talking about, I think this last week, and he said that Lonnie Grimes,
Grimm.
Yeah. That he just basically told the other funny car drivers. This is what we found. See if you can make a solution. And that to me is probably the best approach, because the guys that are actually in the car building these cars will probably find a better solution than a guy that's just teching it. You know what I mean? So I can be very appreciative that they are, at least it's a group effort, to your point.
It is. Yeah, it's a group effort. And, a lot was made of the preseason, the pro superstar shootout down at Bradenton and the effect of that race and everything. And, from a guy who's inside the sport, I can tell you that it's almost like when you're a kid and there's like another kid across the playground. You can't figure this guy out. You don't like him that much. He didn't like you that much. You don't really know. And then all of a sudden one day you throw some rocks at each other and go roll around in the dirt, punch each other a little bit. And then all of a sudden you're the guy's best friend for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
So the pro race, which they're going to do again, I hope they do again.
That was one of the best races. Yeah, it's an awesome race.
So what that pro race finally did, just to finish the point, the pro race did was it really brought everybody together. Like everybody, the dust settles down, everyone goes, okay, like let's chill out a minute here and let's kind of repair this relationship. So in my estimation and everything I know about the guys on the board and our own company, that has turned into a much more positive relationship than it has been in years, because of the fact that people are now like looking at things eye to eye. Situations like this, on this funny car situation, another thing that's being used and worked with a collaborative way. So it's a good thing.
Well, did I hear you right just a few minutes ago when you were talking about how Courtney Force had an accident last year, and then they'd made some provisions to the chassis?
Well, hers was in when she was still driving, so hers and Alexis's were both, I believe, in like 20, maybe 18, somewhere around there.
All right, so when we look at the John Force accident, a lot of people will see the explosion and think, "Oh my gosh, that's the worst ever," because it was humongous. And then he hit the right wall. He kind of tapped it. And then when he went over to the left, that's where the tragic part was. Those additions or changes that they made in the chassis back in 2018 probably saved John Force's life.
I can't speculate and say for sure, but it certainly didn't make it worse.
What's what I'm saying, or it saved a lot of damage, I guess, because that hit, you can see that frame just flex and the tires just go shred, and I can't imagine what that felt like inside that car.
Yeah,
it was horrendous.
That also brings up a point, because from what the reports are on John Force right now, he's dealing with a TBI, traumatic brain injury, which is a lot of times what happens to people on the field, football players and whatnot. And I'm wondering if that is something that's going to end up being brought to our sport, because honestly, it's the fact. They've been going fast for a long time, but just the launch and the shutdown, you're talking some of them are 6Gs. So that's got to do something to your brain where we could, there could be a possibility that there could be some injuries just from running the car.
I read that was an 80G hit.
From John Force?
Yeah, when he hit the wall, it was 80 Gs. Negative 80
Negative,
Gs.
yeah.
Negative 80 Gs, yeah.
Wow.
I don't know how true that is. That could be fake news. But
yeah, hit the button.
Yeah, I didn't. I haven't seen the. Obviously, that data exists, right? They have the race pack data, and I think in my mind, when the tech department comes out with their official report on everything, and my understanding is this: Alan and Joe had their deal the other day. The tech department hasn't come out with an official report yet, because what they're doing here is they want to have a report that says, here's the incident, here's what the effect of the incident was, here is what the solutions are to prevent the parachute issue from happening again. They want to hand the public, the world, whoever, a complete report as to this is the kind of beginning, middle, and end of this, rather than be like, well, here was the crash and we're trying to figure it out. Like they don't want to leave it that open. And to your point, I mean, guys like Don Garlitz and Joe Amato had to quit drag racing top fuel cars because their retinas were detaching. Back then, the parachutes had hit so hard that their eyeballs were literally pulling apart. And so, there is a physical effect involved in this for sure. And whether it's a CTE or that's the big topic in the NFL and in the NHL and stuff. I don't know what the numbers are. I don't know how bad a a frontal or rear style of G-force deal has to be to slosh your mine. It would be very low because my brain is very small.
It just sloshes around in there anyways.
Yeah.
Well, and to be honest, there may not be enough data for it because, we're talking in those two classes, the ones that would be really worried about it, the parachute deployment. You only have 40 drivers versus the NFL where there's 600-700 people. So there may not be a data set enough to actually make a judgment, but it's certainly, it's violent. I'll tell you a quick story. We were at Martin, Michigan last year, and we had parked the toter right next to the right next to the shutdown. And I kept hearing gunshots, what I thought was gunshots. And I was like, what the hell is that? And then eventually we made it up to the fence line, and it was them pulling the chutes. And I guess the air density was just the right amount. It popped, and it just kept sounding like gunshots. I've never heard that before, and I didn't realize that they hit that hard. My parachute, I barely pulled 0.80 Gs. Actually, if I ever pull the chute, I'm halfway worried I'm not going to make it to the end of the track.
Yeah, a lot of times our TV compound is set up at the top end of these different racetracks, and even inside the television trucks, people will hear the parachutes, whack.
Yeah.
It's a stunning thing, especially that part of it. Like, everybody obviously understands when you start to see the header flames and you see the fury of the car leaving, but like when you're actually near it, when they throw the parachutes out, you understand like, oh, this is for real.
Yeah.
Like these people are out of breath because they are thrown into those belts like nobody's business.
And also, like, videos and stuff don't ever do the justice for the audio, but visually, for whatever reason, TV makes it look slower compared to actually real life.
It does.
In real life, it's hard to wrap your head around how fast 300 miles an hour is. It just really is.
It is.
All right. Well, I don't want to take a whole lot more time from you, but I do want to ask one final question about the NHRA, and then we'll go to our rapid fire question. What is your thoughts and theories about the future of the sport with the advent of electric vehicles? There's been a lot of controversy, especially in the bracket racing community, because you can pretty much just dial them whatever number you want, and they'll do it. And you don't have to worry about atmosphere. You don't have to worry about weather. Obviously, the easy thing to do would just be make their own class. But I'm not sure if that's the best route because there's probably not going to be enough of them for a while anyway that it's interested enough. And you're kind of blocking out a segment, whereas the NHRA themselves always have been very progressive in trying to be inclusive. So what I mean, is there, I don't, this is the Ask Brian questions he can't answer session.
No,
but,
I can tell you right now. So the NHRA does have electric vehicle classes. They're in the Lucas Oil Drag Racing Series now. And there is the national, like the Summit, basically the Summit bracket championship has an EV category. Like last year was the first year we had an EV champion who just so happened to be a bracket racer that had won the foot brake championship in a gas car a couple years ago. So racer being a racer, the guy's good. My own personal opinion is, yes, I think that the start of on a professional, not even a professional, if you're going to integrate them into the Lucas Oil Drag Racing Series, then yes, they would have to be classified the way other things are classified. Like, is there a stock eliminator class for a Tesla? I would assume there should be, if you're going to do it that way. And if it proves to be something that is unworkable, then you have to kind of put them into the general population of the prison yard, right, to see what happens. And so, if it turns into something where they can be manipulated to such a way that it can't be enforced and the guy can go out there and just run dead on with a zero every time, then maybe they deserve to be separated in their own deal. The
Nostalgia Drag Racing League, one of our biggest rules is no fuel injection. It's got to be mechanical injection because of, they feel that the tunability and the advent of fuel injection, it makes an unfair advantage. So that's been an ongoing thing since probably the 70s when fuel injections began. Yeah. But I don't think it's any different with the exception of it seems like it's even more dialed. Because literally there is zero, other than wind, there's really zero amount of things you have to take in consideration. Maybe battery charge, I guess. I guess there's probably something there that makes it different, but you would think computers could overcome that. I don't know.
Yeah, and it was a recent discussion on Rocky Mountain Race Week because there was a guy running an EV there, and he was running, I think, in some sort of an index style category, and the car was just getting it done, right? It was like uncannily good running its index. And so to your point, they can be so precisely tuned and set up, like with their speed limiters and all the stuff that you can do with them. They present a much different challenge than other styles of mechanical anything, right? Yeah. And I always joke that, an electric car, is the only thing you could ever bring to Denver, and it would go faster, right? Thinner air. Thinner air, it's going to go faster. It's bizarre.
You're not wrong.
So the other part of this is, there's been guys that have showed up to Teslas at Drag Week. I've been on Drag Week with a couple of EVs. Guy showed up last year with a 38 Chevy that had, I think he adapted a GM electric car battery. He had a couple of like forklift motors in it, and it would run 12s. He drove this thing through the entirety of Drag Week. He had like a 110 charger with him, and he had like the level 2 charger cord, and he made it. And it was a pretty shocking thing. Like this was a home built freaking thing, and he finished it up. He was an electrical engineer. Right? This was his hot rod, and I respect that totally.
100%. That's got to not be easy. I know at least 2 or 3 years ago was the first EV that I saw. Somebody was doing a Tesla and drag and drive, and they had gutted the entire. All there was a driver's seat.
Yeah,
I mean every piece of sheet metal out of that, because the cars I think will weigh like 6,000 pounds or more, 7,000 from the factory. So you're just trying to shed as much as possible. Not so much to go fast, is just to be able to make the drive. From my understanding, because that's very difficult.
More efficient.
Yeah,
and I think that the bottom line to me with EVs and drag racing is that we are in a better position in this sport than any other sport is with electric vehicles, because like NASCAR just rolled out that weird EV thing the other day that they were pursuing the idea of electric series, and then the way that the EV marketplace and stuff has started to kind of shred itself, they've kind of backed off, but they unveiled the car. IndyCar just one race ago unveiled their hybrid system, which is the first step for them that eventually will probably end up with EVs. So the difference here is when those racing series take their particular track, they have one way to go, right? They don't have classes. Like when NASCAR is going to hybridize and then eventually electrify themselves, that's it. And the same with IndyCar. You're going to hybridize and electrify yourself. Same with F1. You're going to hybridize and electrify yourself. In drag racing, you will still be able to come to a drag race and hear nitro cars, as well as when the time frame, whether that's 10 years, however long it is, you can have top level EV competitors in their own class with things that sound like an industrial belt sander, and you can have fuel cars. So we're going to be that one place in racing that you're going to be able to see whatever you want to see, and I think that puts us in a unique position among anybody else out there.
Yeah, I only say that I think if they're going to make one class, they got to have like a speaker and Jetson noises when they take off, just to give them something extra. I don't know, because it is
the George Jetson noise. It's a pleasing noise. The George Jetson, I'm not trying to recreate it, but everybody knows what it is. Yeah, I kind of like that. Yeah, I like the Jetson.
All right, man, we've taken so much of your time. Let's just get real quick into the rapid fire questions, and then we'll let you get on with your day.
Sure.
All right, so just 10 questions, real easy. You ready?
Yep.
All right. Ford or Chevy?
Ford.
All right. Favorite power adder?
Favorite power adder? I'm actually going to go nostalgic here and say nitrous.
Okay. All right. That's coming from you. That's interesting. Cool. Favorite muscle car?
67 L72 427 Biscayne.
Well, that seems pretty specific. Alcohol or gas?
Alcohol.
Big tire or small tire?
Big tire.
Pro tree or sportsman tree?
Pro tree.
Trans brake or foot brake?
Foot brake.
1/8 mile or quarter mile?
Quarter mile.
RV or hotel? That is if you're racing.
Hotel.
Hotel? Ooh. Really? I like to be at the track. All right.
I live at hotels, so I guess I just
got used to it. And the last one's going to be subjective. What is Brian Lohnes watching on YouTube nowadays? What's your favorite channel other than your own?
Damn. I really like History Simplified. If you ever watch History Simplified, it's really good. Periscope Films is great.
Wrong. The answer was Line Locked Podcast.
Oh, I meant the Line Locked.
No, we're just teasing you, man. Yeah. No, go ahead. Finish your story about the history.
That's actually really cool that you're that into history. That's your favorite. Is awesome. I wouldn't expect that answer, and that's really cool.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It's to me, it's the guys super entertaining. The videos are fantastic and they're funny. Yeah. So yeah, I'd say History Simplified.
I'm gonna check them out and make sure I give them a sub.
I've watched some of his stuff. It's really good.
So lastly, tell us how people can find you.
Sure. They can find me on a daily basis. You can find me at bangshift.com. Chad Reynolds and I started that site in 2008. Still trooping along. We write stuff there every day. You can find me on Instagram. It's just my name, Brian Lohnes. You can find me at the Dork-o-Motive podcast or the NHRA Insider podcast or your local Fox affiliate next Sunday.
Yeah.
From Seattle, Washington.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, man. I tell you, if we have to end this because we can't do the podcast anymore, I feel fulfilled that we have gotten Brian Lohnes. I have probably mentioned your name 4 or 5 times, even with your pictures. Like, where you at, Brian Lohnes? So you fulfilled my dream of talking to you, and we really appreciate you coming on and being nice enough to take the time to do it.
Well, listen, I appreciate a great conversation. You guys, great perspective and questions. I get to do a fair amount of this stuff, and you guys are bringing something a little bit different here, which I think is cool.
Yeah, cool. Right. Awesome.
Well, we appreciate it. And as always, make sure you find us and subscribe and like and all the comments. And we only got 13 subs, Brian. That's not cutting it.
It's gonna grow, man. It's gonna grow.
All right, man. I appreciate it. Brian Lohnes, man. Take care, buddy.